This is our last video tutorial. We will look at the benefits of lesson planning. This video is relevant to you because it directly connects to part 3 of the assignment. You will be asked to describe and demonstrate your rationales for taking decisions as you tell us about a lesson plan. In that sense, as part of the appendix of this assignment, you need to incorporate a detailed lesson plan and any materials relevant to this lesson. If you are a pre-service teacher with not much experience creating lesson plans, this video will give you really important information. If you are an already in-service teacher, this is a good video to refresh your memory about the elements that you need to incorporate in a lesson plan. A plan can help teachers to think about the details of a lesson and, more importantly, the learning outcomes. We start a plan by writing down our learning outcomes. We'll get to this point in a few more slides. It provides teachers with security of the things they need to do, the sequence of activities that they need to follow, in sometimes a very unpredictable teaching classroom. In that sense, it becomes a log of what teachers have taught in the past and what they need to teach in the present. And it's also a document they can refer back in case they need it. So if a teacher cannot teach a lesson and somebody else needs to take this lesson, this group of students, lesson plans are important because whoever takes over that lesson, a new teacher, will know what needs to be done as part of that specific session. In that sense, a lesson plan is a written description of how students will move towards obtaining a specific learning outcome. It describes what students do, their behavior, and they are systematic records of teachers' thoughts about what needs to be covered during a lesson. A lesson plan is very likely to include the learning outcomes, also known as learning objectives, the activities that students are going to be doing from beginning to end, how exactly these activities are going to be organized, so what activity comes first, second, third, and so on. How long each activity is going to take, and what kind of interactions students are going to be engaging with. Is it group work, pair work, individual work? And more importantly as well, what the resources are, the things that teachers need for that lesson to be feasible. So do they need access to internet, laptops, mobile phones, etc. In the following slides, I'm going to give you some tips about how to create your learning outcomes, also known as LOS. Because this is our first step in our lesson planning, our learning outcomes should describe the destination we want our students to reach by the end of the session. They help us in the sense that they give us an idea of the kind of activities we need to incorporate in that plan. They also give teachers a way to evaluate what students need to learn, and that's why it is important to know how to write good learning outcomes. And that's where we start in this couple of slides. So let's continue. Let's talk about the components of a learning outcome. We have that they are comprised by an audience, task, and a context or condition. So as part of the audience, we need to ask ourselves, who is completing the outcome? As part of the task, the question we need to think about is, what action is taking place? And in terms of the context or condition, we need to think about the question, in which circumstances or to which level of mastery. For example, students will write about the members of their family and present this information to their peers. We have the audience, students. We have the tasks. They will write about and present information. And we have the context, family, and their peers. Bloom's taxonomy can help you think about action verbs to develop your learning outcomes. This taxonomy provides different levels of learning. If we start from the bottom, those actions in the bottom of the light bulb of your figure on the top right of your screen are all about knowledge. The next level are actions that comprise things about or actions about comprehension. Then we have the level of actions that show that students are able to apply specific actions and things. And then we move on to analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. I'm aware that this taxonomy is a bit blurry on your screen, but you can always search for it on the internet and see the different levels of learning and the different actions you could take into account when writing down a learning outcome. Richard Amato and Richards and Farrell proposed that a lesson plan needs to have the following stages: opening, stimulation, and instruction, as well as closure and follow-up. But this is just an example and one idea of what stages of a lesson plan you need to think about. There are other people like Awabata, who we have explored in our class, that talk about a pre-activity, a during activity, and then post-activity. But let's have a look at this example from these authors here on screen. We have the opening stage where we tell our students or we ask questions about what it is that they have learned in the previous class. So we're kind of exploring their previous knowledge, what concepts they've learned, so that they remember, that triggers some information that they will need for this class. Then we go into the stimulation phase, where teachers pose questions to get students thinking about what is gonna come. So we can ask them about, we can ask them about a picture. If we're showing them a picture, what do you think this picture is about? Or if we're showing them a song, we give them a title and we say, what do you think this song is about? So that is the stimulation phase. As part of the introduction, this is where we present the activities, we check for student understanding, we encourage student involvement, and we basically ask them to work either in pairs or in groups or by themselves. Then we have the closure phase, In this phase, the teacher checks that students have learned or what they have learned in class. You might ask questions about what do you learn, how do you feel about these activities, what was easier, what was more difficult, so that you get a sense of what students actually learned. And then we have a follow-up. This is the last phase of the lesson where the teacher uses other activities to reinforce the concepts that they have learned. But again, this is just one example of the stages of a lesson plan, but in the literature, there are other stages as well, which you can explore and read more about. And we've seen some of these stages as part of our language learning and technology units. One other thing that we need to think about as teachers after we develop a lesson plan is whether our lesson plan is appropriate for our students' ages and levels of English, for instance. So we can ask ourselves questions such as, is this what I want students to learn in this class? Are all the tasks necessary? Will I be using all these materials? Have I detailed the types of interaction that they need to undertake? What kind of instructions will students need? Are my instructions clear? And how will I check that students have understood the content of the lesson? These are questions that you ask yourself as part of the process of reflecting whether your lesson plan is appropriate for your students. And that's it. There are more references here if you want to continue reading about lesson planning. But this is just a brief introduction to lesson planning. Of course, there is more literature to explore and more examples. If you want to look at specifically the work of Richard, which is Richards and Farrell's, that the article I used, the chapter of the book I used to create this lesson plan, I'm incorporating that as part of the materials on Blackboard, so you will have access to this chapter, and in that chapter you will have a look at some examples of lesson planning, so you could also have a look at how they look like, what is the structure, and so on and so forth. I hope you find this video useful, and thank you for watching. Any questions, do let me know. Bye bye.